all of the things that I had been coming back and forth in for months was actually not what they thought it was. And by the time they figured it out, I was in end stage organ failure, body full of ascites, lungs, heart covered with fluid, both kidneys and liver completely in failure, a bowel blockage, and extremely cachectic, meaning extremely metabolic wasted. My weight gain was the amount of fluid my body was building up in all the wrong places, despite the fact that I was severely malnourished and had little stick arms and legs and was incredibly gaunt. And so that was what led to them realizing I had a grapefruit size mass on my right ovary. I had lesions in my liver. I had peritoneal implants, basically little nodules throughout my whole pelvic cavity. I had lymph node involvement everywhere and metastatic fluid buildup throughout a lot of different parts of my body. And so that was the end of the line. And the funny thing is they told me at the time in the hospital that I had about 3 months to live.
If you've been thinking about starting a ketogenic diet, I encourage you to just do it. Yes, you are the reason I started this podcast in the first place. More than anything else, I love to empower people to take responsibility for their own health. And for so many people, a ketogenic diet is the most effective way to reverse metabolic dysfunction, which is the very foundation of all chronic illness. But to do this effectively, you need 3 specific tools or you're going to struggle and you won't see results. I do not want this to happen to you. I give you these 3 tools and walk you through how to set them up and use them to transform your health in my 5-day keto challenge. You can register right now for my next 5-day keto challenge at ketogenicdietcoach.com. Hello and welcome to the Ketogenic Diet Show. My name is Mary Beauchamp and I am so delighted to introduce you today to a very, very special guest. Her name is Dr. Nasha Winters. Nasha is a global healthcare authority and best-selling author in integrative cancer care and research, consulting with physicians around the world. She has educated hundreds of professionals in the clinical use of mistletoe and has created robust educational programs for both healthcare institutions and the public on incorporating vetted integrative therapies in cancer care to enhance outcomes. Dr. Winters is currently focused on opening a comprehensive metabolic oncology hospital and research institute in the U.S., where the best of standard care will be offered and the most advanced integrative therapies as well. This facility will be in a residential setting on a gorgeous campus against a backdrop of regenerative farming, EMF mitigation, and retreat, as well as state-of-the-art medical technology and data collection and evaluation to improve patient outcomes. Thank you so much for joining me today, Nasha. Welcome to the show. And let's just start by having you tell us a little bit about your journey, what led you here, and of course, I'd love for you to talk about your book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer.
Well, I love it. Before you even started rolling with this conversation, we were just kind of, amazed at our oversouls and our parallel lives and whatnot. And I think being drawn to even just the metabolic field in general, there's something that probably drew you into it. I don't even know your whole story yet, that probably something with your own health or someone very near and dear to you is what drew you in. And so for me to get into the realm of the metabolic approach to cancer was no different than that. I was 19, just shy of my 20th birthday. I had been in and out of an ER for multiple months leading up to my 20th birthday. And everyone was sort of like, oh, this is just more of the same. This is just your endometriosis or your polycystic or your Hashimoto's or your rheumatoid arthritis or your IBS that you've been dealing with forever. That should have probably been a clue. And then it's just an exacerbation of those things. So nope, just take another pill, go home. You're a histrionic teenager. Just, get out of my face. And I knew something was terribly wrong and I couldn't get anybody to believe me. And because I was pre-med and very much like all gung-ho about medicine, I trusted the medical environment to really know what they were talking about. And despite my best efforts, no one really listened until I landed in the ER. A friend of mine rushed me there because I couldn't breathe. I was completely weak. When I arrived, I had this ginormous belly that I thought I was just bloated again because I just couldn't I had this history, and I had all these other issues, but I'd also gained a lot of weight. So I thought I was having weight issues, but I didn't understand this until later. What I was actually dealing with was I got the right doctor at the right time to finally do the right workup, to realize that all of the things that I'd been coming back and forth in for months was actually not what they thought it was. And by the time they figured it out, I was in end stage organ failure, body full of ascites, lungs, heart covered with fluid, both kidneys and liver completely in failure, a bowel blockage, and extremely cachectic, meaning extremely metabolic wasted. My weight gain was the amount of fluid my body was building up in all the wrong places, despite the fact that I was severely malnourished and had little stick arms and legs and was incredibly gaunt. And so that was what led to them realizing I had a grapefruit sized mass on my right ovary. I had lesions in my liver. I had peritoneal implants, basically little nodules throughout my whole pelvic cavity. I had lymph node involvement everywhere and metastatic fluid buildup throughout a lot of different parts of my body. And so that was the end of the line. And the funny thing is they told me at the time in the hospital that that I had about 3 months to live. And if you're in medical, you are a nurse, I'm a doctor. Like now looking back, I go, I didn't think I had 3 weeks to live at that point. I was so far down the rabbit hole. But they did also tell me, you have 3 months to live with standard of care, but we can't give you standard of care because you're too sick. You're too far gone. Your kidney and livers are too far down. We have to pretty much triage to get the fluid out of here. We've got to support your heart because I was in like 70 percentile in my oxygen levels, and like support and see if we can get the fluid off your heart and lungs so that you can breathe. And that's where the story began. Wow. And so it was that process that I had no expectation of surviving this. This is 1991, you guys. This is not the time of Dr. Google, right? I was left to my own devices. There wasn't even a hospice at that time in those areas. That was still like a concept being built out. And they basically sent me home to die. And I expected that, but I wanted to understand why this was missed because I was always curious. I've always been kind of an out-of-the-box thinker. I wanted to understand, because I was also pre-med, I wanted to understand what was happening in my body as it was going through this process. And I wanted to understand why it was missed for so long. And so I'm like, if I'm going to go out, I want to go out with some understanding. And so that's where I thought I put my energy to focus on versus focusing on my death. I wanted to focus on the why. And that sort of strategy apparently has been working. 31 years later, here we are, literally October 21st, 2022 was 31 years out from that terminal diagnosis.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. That's incredible.
Yeah.
How intense.
Yeah. It's a good way to put it. Yeah. So yeah, that's how I landed here. That's how I've continued that level of curiosity, that level of wonderment about the how and why of this for each of us, that we continue to sort of wage war on cancer. And yet we haven't really moved the needle on the dial very far in the past 50 years since we, waged war on cancer. And we haven't really done anything different to either treat or prevent it since the first time we started to consider cancer as a genetic disease back in 1914 through the work of Dr. Theodore Boveri, who sort of coined cancer as a genetic disorder, this somatic mutation theory. And so that's how we built our entire system. Our entire medical model is around this theory. And it's one that has sort of suppressed other theories that have been trying to emerge since then. And it's where we funnel all of our research dollars. It's where we fund all of our treatments. It's where we fund any of the innovations in health are based on that theory and that model. And, what is the definition of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome? You'd kind of think we'd figure that out by now, that we've kind of been in a little hamster wheel of insanity. And not to say that genetic mutations don't play a role, but they play a far smaller role. And what people like Dr. Otto Warburg realized in 1920 is that there was an upstream effect to that genetic expression, which is what was happening down at that mitochondrial level, which I'm sure that you and all of your listeners are incredibly wise to, in that, wow, it's actually the mitochondrial function and what's happening in the cytoplasm and the extracellular matrix that is actually determining how well we protect our genome. And that it's when that gets beat up that the genome becomes vulnerable and can express. But even then, even that, still, genetics account for less than 10% of all cancers today. And yet, so despite all of that, we're ignoring the elephant in the living room.
Wow. It's so true. And we've latched on to this genetic theory to the point where we've sort of put blinders on to the other possibilities. And when you talk about the traditional model of care, it's basically limiting the options to surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. Please let me know if there's other things I'm missing here. But
chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, but also targeted therapies, hormone blockade therapies, and now the hot topic of immune therapies. But there's still a variation on the theme. They're still very tumor centric and genetic centric.
Yeah. So you were on your deathbed, literally, a young woman.
Yep.
And probably terrified, and you've basically been sent home to die.
Yeah.
And from that, you were able to somehow, with the grace of a miracle or God or whatever it is, you came through this. Tell me what you did in your deathbed that took you out of this.
So here's what's interesting is, hindsight's 2020, because people have asked me that question for 31 years. Like, what did you do? And basically, it's almost like what I didn't do and what I wasn't aware of. It's what I didn't have sort of distracting me, what I didn't have all the well-meaning advice swirling around me, that I honestly think having that diagnosis all of those years ago was a blessing as well. Because I think today, if I had that same diagnosis, everyone and their dog, every influencer, every web page, every social media, shout out, every physician, everybody I would have run into would have a different thought and recommendation for what was going on. And frankly, that probably would have literally overwhelmed me to death. Yeah. And so I was in a situation where I was very isolated. And by choice of being isolated from medical system, from being isolated from family, from being isolated from certain resources, very, very, very poor, very, very unresourced with regards to a lot of good, emotionally healthy support in my family of origin. I was even living away from my family of origin on my own. My first, 2 years into college in a small little mountain town that was also not well resourced. It just had basically one little ER and one little oncology center, and kind of still does today in many ways. And so it's like in some ways, I literally was left to my own devices. And
so you were all alone.
Yep. And I had a handful of people on board, which was one of my biochemistry professors. Mm-hmm. One of my chemistry professors, I passed out in his class from pain. And I was failing out of the class, and I had to go in with him and tell him what was going on and basically say, I don't want your pity. This is what's happening. I will finish this course. I will get on top of this, but I just need you to be aware that I will get through what I need to get through, but just give me some grace around this. And he was incredibly, incredibly supportive. And then the man who would later become my husband, what crazy 22-year-old decides, hey, I think I'll fall in love with the dying chick, was there, who also knew. And the only reason I think that relationship worked is because my now husband at the time, he had watched his brother, who was diagnosed years before with a terminal pancreatic cancer, which if your listeners know anything about that is always terminal. Almost. And he managed to survive after standard of care went in to open up the surgery, closed him back up and said, please go get your affairs in order. Gave him less than 3 months to live. And my husband likes to tell the story. They gave him less than 3 months to live. He gave them the finger and he went to Mexico. And so that was back in the 80s, the early 80s, that he ended up in a clinic down in Mexico and was bringing in therapies outside of the standard of care because standard of care had nothing to offer him either. And he managed to live 24 extra years with that terminal diagnosis. So it's like Steve had already had some experience with that had a belief system that could manage around my belief system. And again, I want to just reiterate, I had no expectation of living. And in fact, this is probably an important side note. I'd spent the few years leading up to that diagnosis actually on several occasions trying to take my own life. Okay. There was not a lot of will to live. There was no belief system that I could somehow overcome what I had experienced growing up and sort of the limitations of where I grew up and my sort of socioeconomic status of what I grew up in. I totally understand the sort of disenfranchised environment of like, here's your lot in life and that's all you get. That was the belief system I had around me. And so it didn't look like it was a big deal that I was the first person to go to college. Right. And I had to take out student, like I already broke molds to do what I was doing up to that point. And so when that happened, this is what I think is so strange to share with folks. It's like that moment when they're like, it can't be done, you're going to die. If people get to know me, they start to realize that that is like the ultimate double dog dare. Yeah. And what that incites in me is this, seriously, I'll show you. And so it really triggers out my stubborn genes and my get out of my way kind of mentality and my, okay, if you say it can't be done, I'm going to find a way around it. And it still wasn't about me trying to survive. It was about me just trying to understand and make myself comfortable in the process. And so that was one of the elements to this. The second element is because I didn't have resources. I didn't have insurance. I didn't have those pieces. When I went in for my second opinion to see if there was something that could be done, they basically said, you don't have the resources to get it done, and you're still too fragile to actually take on standard of care. And our best advice to you is to die. I mean, I'm really paraphrasing, but that was the essence of the conversation. After that conversation, I landed in the library, my little local library, and I went down this integrative. I had no idea about anything about integrative medicine. Nothing, never, no exposure to it whatsoever. And I walked down this aisle and this book jumped off the shelf at me almost literally. And it was called a crazy book called Quantum Healing by a relatively unknown person by the name of Deepak Chopra. This is 1991. I sat down on the floor in that library and I read that book in 2 hours. And it was definitely, it's talking about a quantum shift, a paradigm shift. It literally gave me a paradigm shift. And what it did in me is it instilled this place of, do I want to stay or do I want to go? Because here's my opportunity to leave at the desire I've had for so long, that this is an opportunity. And it would kind of like I could leave as sort of a martyr, like, oh, how sad she died of cancer. Like that would have been like a really nice way to leave this world, right? Much better than offing myself, which was the initial few trials and errors on that. But instead, what it did for me is it turned on a pilot light. It turned on a pilot light to say, I want to live. And I don't know how much time I have. It could be more weeks, could be more months. If I get a few years, I'll be lucky. I had no expectations. And so that was the second layer. And then the third layer, and this is what's really specific to your tribe, I had a bowel blockage, as you recall. And in that bowel blockage, anything I tried to put in would create extreme pain, and it would come back up. And I'm telling you, the worst thing for me ever in the world is throwing up. Like, I don't know why. It's like, it's such a trauma for me. And so I didn't eat for 2.5 months. Wow. And I managed to sip on small amounts of water, small amounts of herbal tea. I stumbled across a tea known as pau d'arco. Topebia is a particular South American herb that I'd stumbled across somewhere in some random book in my library that I ran across that could be helpful for cancer. It would be 20 some years down the road when we realized it actually had a inducing of apoptosis for ovarian cancer cells, which, how random was that? The other thing that happened is because I couldn't eat because of the blockage, it also, even though I was drained multiple times for the ascites, it would come back very, very quickly because I was so malnourished. But what happened is, as I was drinking the water, like fasting, the fluid started to readjust itself, and I stopped filling up as quickly, and I started to overcome that bowel blockage naturally. And I was able to start getting in little protein smoothies and things like that that was starting to nourish me on another level. But it wasn't until way later that I would learn about the work of Dr. Mareshi from 1909 that showed that fasting was one of the most profound ways to shrink tumor mass. And so it was an accidental find. Right. It was also in the library where I started learning about the work, and I love your last name. I'm a huge Beauchamp fan. So I was like, even though I was pre-med and I was in all the science courses, the germ theory just didn't really resonate with me. And so I was really excited to learn about Beauchamp and the work of the terrain theory. And I started to just be like, well, that just seems to resonate. And then I stumbled across the work of Otto Warburg because the somatic mutation theory and the two-hit theory of cancer didn't quite resonate with me. And I had known the environment in which I'd come from and the way I had nourished or not nourished myself for this first 2 decades of my life, that there was something more than just genetics at play here. And I got into that, and I got into the work of Robert Ader and of Candace Pert and of Bruce Lipton, all in early stages, the early years of psychoneuroimmunology. And I stumbled across the work of Mina Bissell. I'm a huge researcher. So I ran across, I surrounded myself with these islands of experts that took me completely out of the paradigm of the time, and frankly, still the paradigm of the time, and started getting me curious to other things. So as I started to slowly regain some vital force and started to get a little bit better, I started to understand about food as medicine. I started to understand about asking different questions and about evaluating what was going on with me and starting to gather metrics of what was going on. And it would still take me another 5 or 6 years before I felt like I was stable enough to feel confident enough to trust my body a little bit more. And I was very, very private about what was going on because of a variety of reasons. But first of all, I didn't think they would let me stay in school. I definitely didn't think they'd let me into medical school. And I also did not want to be seen as a victim. I did not want to be seen as a cancer patient. And those were very pride is another genetic mutation in my family of origin as well that played itself well, that I just was like, I will do this my way and I will keep it all on myself. And so that's the places that I've learned along the way that have informed where I am today. And those are the early years. And my God, the things we've learned ever since, the things we've built upon it. I feel like I was lucky enough to kind of kick the can down the road far enough to learn something new. And then again and again and again. And so now I can take that knowledge and help someone get to the point that took me over a decade to get to within a matter of weeks or months versus a matter of years. And that's just because of the beauty of the resources and the information that have come to light since that time in the early 90s and into the mid 90s.
Wow. That is incredible.
Yeah.
Your story makes me a little emotional.
It does me too.
I bet. Yeah. I mean,
Yes.
that's really, really incredible. And you bring up such an important point that I want to just emphasize, is that this is about the mind and the body and how they work together. And you made a really important decision that you wanted to live, and even though you had been thinking otherwise, that book you read really shifted something in you. And that's how we can really utilize our own unconscious programming to heal ourselves. And that's really the nature of the placebo effect, right? This is how we heal our body with our mind. And I'm a big fan of many of the doctors you mentioned as well. And when I graduated from nursing school, the very first job I got was in a clinic working with Dr. Stephen Finney.
Amazing.
Right? Yeah. It was just amazing. And that was in 1994. And so I had no idea how any of this would ever be important to me. But I never forgot what I learned there. And then raising 4 kids and doing all that for many years, I was always involved with diet and nutrition, and just always knew that was very important. And that's why I didn't ever want to work in a hospital from the very beginning. And so I swore to myself, I'm never working in a hospital, no matter what I do. And then I immediately got that job at Stephen Finney's clinic. And that was just such a game changer for me. And so I love Stephen Finney to this day. I was able to see him at a conference a few months ago and see him for the first time in, 20 years. And he remembered me, and it was great. But anyway,
Wow.
That was how I started with all of this, and then just kind of took things online and been doing this online keto coaching thing for many years before. I was probably the first one online, I feel like, doing this, and I'm slow to the show, so I'm not the biggest fish in the pond, but I have a lot of experience just working with people, and I've seen all the problems and all the trials and all the failures, and the things that nobody talks about. It's like, and what I came to the conclusion after doing retreats for 15 years and hearing people and listening is that so much of it is not physiology. It's mind, and it's the mental part, and it's the energy that we hold in our body, and it's all of those emotional factors that we have to consider as well. And if we're just doing, a physical approach to cutting it out, burning it out, chemicals and all these things, we're really just not addressing the root cause. And what a miracle that you found that book in the library, Deepak Chopra. That is just crazy.
It's totally crazy.
All this other stuff. I mean, I feel like my life has been the same way, just and folding. Blossoming of all, okay, there's a new science here and a new doctor here, and it's just like exploded since we were learning about this 20 years ago.
We were the little babies, the little guppies in this sort of metabolic pond.
Yeah, now it's like a real thing. This is really a thing. It's not just a theory that Otto Warburg brought forth. I mean, we're really have gone leaps and bounds beyond this. We're light years away from where we need to be in the medical model of care, but at least there is the availability of alternatives. And thank goodness for Dr. Google, because that's how a lot of people discover that there is another way.
Totally. It's so funny. I love, first of all, wow. On your story. And you said how lucky you were. I'm telling you how lucky are all of us that you had that experience because of the people you've served. Just is so exciting to me. The other thing is, I laugh because I was in private practice for 17 years, and I still I left that in 2015, and I still run into old patients, colleagues, or they send me messages online and they're like, "Oh my God, I just heard this study and you were telling me this 20 years ago." You probably get that all the time because we've been in this for so long. You're just like, I know. Right. But now that they've invented it, it's real, And so I always laughed about the doctor, when people would say, "Well, Dr. Oz said," I'm like, and now it is real, because we've been saying that for 20 years. So I laugh that we've been around long enough to see the cycles move through this. So there's that piece, but also to walk through the haters, the doubters of this, because even in my own experiences, I started to heal and get better. When I went back to them, months later, when things had stabilized, so now what? They literally, it was like, they were pissed that I was there. I so shattered their belief systems. They're like, I started getting all that, you had to have been misdiagnosed. This had to have been, I'm like, excuse me, we were all there together. We have all, this is well before I was, I wish that I had kept, because I didn't think I was going to go into no one thought about the things to document or keep or talk about. Now I can look back in retrospect and be like, oh my God, I wish I had all these pieces. But the naysayers, the doubters of even seeing it before their very eyes, and the 10,000 plus patients that I've had the absolute privilege to walk this journey with, that have been able to show their doctors another way, and still people are like, la, 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 this doesn't exist. Like, how is that possible? I am the person, I'm so curious. If something works, I'm interested in it. I want to understand why. I want to evaluate it. I want to see if it sticks, if it's got that validity to it. So that was really funny that you brought that up. And then the third thing that you stimulated in me was about the mind-body piece is, she's become a really good friend, Dr. Kelly Turner, and a lot of people may know her from her work, Radical Remission, and later Radical Hope, and now her documentary that is out in the same name. And she was a sociologist in an oncology environment where she would hear about this concept of spontaneous remissions, and she would talk to the doctors. They're like, yeah, it happens, but she was she kept hearing about it so many times. She thought, I'm going to do a project on this. Now, 10 years she spent looking at 1,000 spontaneous remission patients and evaluating them and interviewing them to say, what do you think was you asking me, why do you think you're still here? And in that, she brought it down to 9 common denominator factors. She's since added a 10th. And what's so amazing to me is only 2 of them are, maybe 3 now, since she's added the 3rd, are tangible, meaning something outside of you that needs to be done. So those 3 now are the first 2, what she was 9 before it went to the 10, was supplements and diet are foundational. She since has added exercise. They're very tangible. The other 7 are completely in the mental, emotional, spiritual sphere. And that is where I'm like, what amazing. And her site now documents, I'm on it, as well as, thousands, I don't even know how many thousands of people she has now documented spontaneous remission people, showing that's nothing spontaneous about it. It's very radical. It takes a lot to change your terrain to become one of those miracles. And so she's now catalogs and has this ongoing dialogue with people. When you have someone who's diagnosed with terminal cancer or something, or a terminal condition, and they're like feeling so hopeless because the data out there suggests that it's impossible, I send them to her website. I send them to her books. I send them to her stories of the month, because you get to meet the thousands of us that are still walking this planet today that overcame the impossible. And so that drives me bonkers when people try to tell you when it's the end of the line. It's incredible. Like, it's not up to them. There's a lot more at play here. So I just love that you brought that up, and that it brought up some emotion in you, because it does for me every single time. I see miracles every single day. I don't know how my colleagues don't. It's like you either have to have your eyes closed, or you're not asking the right questions, or you're not following up with those people to know how many are still around. It's just incredible to me.
That's such a great point you bring up about, just telling somebody it's the end of the line. It's like the opposite of the placebo effect. We call this the nocebo effect, right? It's when you hear something and if you believe that, well, then that's probably going to determine what day you're going to die. I mean, pretty consistently and precisely.
Yeah.
And to implant that into anybody's mind as a doctor, as a healer, to me is just criminal. Like, I just, I can't wrap my head around that. And you didn't buy into that, and thank God you did not. And then your life just unfolded with so many miracles that just kept showing up. And at the time, you were just following the threads. That's what we do. I loved her book, by the way, Radical Remission. I mention her in my book as well, and I have quotes from her book in my book. And her book just really changed my life in so many ways. And I just appreciate her work so much. So thanks for bringing her up. Radical Remission, amazing book.
Oh. Yes.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, so you mentioned the terrain theory, and I know that you and I know a lot more about that than a lot of people. So maybe just explain a little bit about what that means. I mean, we talked about Bruce Lipton and his work with genetics, and realizing that it's the environment around the cells that's actually determining the behavior of the cell. It is not the nucleus of the cell, which has been what we've been hyper focused on for so many years in medical history. And we've known this, though, now for, I don't know, 50, 60, maybe 100 years, that there's something else at play that is determining the behavior of cells. And it is the environment that the cells are in. So maybe just elaborate that on that a little bit more for us. That would be great.
Sure.
Quick break from the programming to let you know that nothing makes me happier than empowering people to make informed decisions about their health based on the hard scientific facts. The ketogenic diet has stood the test of time, and the scientific literature shows us that this can be a powerful healing strategy. Don't let another day slip by when you could be doing something proactively to change your health. If you're still wondering how to begin your keto diet, it's time to stop thinking about it and start doing something. Go to ketogenicdietcoach.com and register for my next 5-day keto challenge. You will walk away with a clear plan, and I know you will absolutely be amazed by the results you will see in just 5 days.
First of all, you said it so beautifully, but to get drilled down, to get very specific, for me, my life experience is kind of pointed to 10 major factors that impact that environment of our terrain. And so I call them my terrain 10. And those are a combination. And I talk about the terrain 10 drops in the mitochondrial bucket, or the cytoplasmic bucket. And that is the epigenetics, which folks like Bruce Lipton speak to. And that's that sort of the canopy of our genetics that is actually very mutable or mutatable by our lifestyle, thoughts, etc. So it's the above the gene concept that we can actually change the expression of over 90% of the time of our gene. It's so in our power to change it. So when I hear someone say, well, my grandmother had breast cancer and my mom had breast cancer, so therefore it's not a surprise I have breast cancer. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. The BRCA gene is a really good example.
Right. So many people say that. I got my genes tested, so I know that, I'm this or I'm that. And they've already made up this whole scenario about what is true for them.
There's the nocebo at play. So there's that piece. I mean, it was years after my diagnosis that we found out that I'm BRCA, which is like, oh, well, that, and everyone's like, well, that's why you got cancer. There it is. I'm like, because we've now learned that my BRCA status has nothing to do with my survival rate is no different than anybody else's with BRCA or without. That's the one thing that really pisses me off about the narrative in this is they somehow terrify people into thinking that this is a doomsday, and yet it does not change your survival rate one iota, but it does make you more vulnerable in certain things. So one of them that makes you more vulnerable is radiation is really, really a trigger for the BRCA gene, the broken expression of your BRCA gene. And so what are we telling these women to do and men to do? We're telling them to smash and radiate their breast tissue every 6 months for screening.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask you about mammograms. So I'm really glad you brought this up because it's so infuriating to me.
It's so infuriating. So we'll come back to that discussion here in a little bit. But that one is just like an example of just misinformation, like sort of right, but not quite. And so epigenetics, again, we've even been able to show upwards of 12 generations before you have impacted the way your body expresses, but you have control over that way more than you've ever been taught to believe. And that your father has impact on your epigenetic expression just by what he ate in his youth. I mean, those are just expressions. Or if you had family that went through major traumas, genocides, concentration camps, that imprints on your stress response and some catecholamine SNPs that you may have and things like that. So just to give an example, those might be your propensities or the potential patterns within you, but it's up to you to break those generational traumas, to break those generational disruptions. The buck stops with you. So maybe it carried to you, but you certainly don't have to carry it any further. So that's the epigenetic drop. The next drop, this is what we're all here for, metabolic. So what are you fueling those cells with, right? We are meant to be hybrid engines, right? We are meant to be Priuses. Like that's just the way it is. And we are meant to be going into starvation and feast modes several different times of the year since the beginning of time. We've co-evolved with this. That's why we have this, is to survive, is to be able to be a hybrid engine. But basically since 1850, we all have put the brick on the accelerator pedal of sugar burners and have sort of forgotten how to be a fat burner. And so once we've moved into the era where we went from about 5 pounds of sugar per year per person in 1850, we're now somewhere, depending which research you read, 145 to 175 pounds of sugar per person per year. We went from today, we talk about low carb, and I just crack up because in the Western world, 150 years ago, that was normal carb. And so we just have we've kind of made up stories around it all, right? So there's these components that have happened. So our bodies are so gummed up in the work that the preferred fuel source is so far from our reach now, we have to work much harder to overcome it. And that's why you need a Mary in your life or some of these other keto coaches that can help your body become that dual hybrid engine again and help push it through. But when you're naturally in rhythm with yourself, you should be able to go from 13, 14, 15 hours of fasting and be showing ketones no matter what you're eating during the day. If you are metabolically healthy, you should be able to comfortably go several days without food if need be, because that's what your ancestors had to do to go find food. You should be able to not have to have a snack before you go to bed or a meal the second you hop out of bed in the morning. You should be able to comfortably, not eat for 4 hours. Like, this is the place where we now know that 6.8% of Americans, and likely all people in Western countries, are metabolically broken to the point that they can't say they can do this. There's some other factors that play into it as well, but ultimately everyone is massively a sugar burner, have forgotten how to be fat burners, and it's clogging up the works and creating all of the chronic illnesses we face today. So we look at that drop in the bucket. How are you dealing with your insulin? How are you dealing with, the processing of carbohydrates? Some of us can get by with more, some less, all of it dependent on so many factors of these 10 drops in the bucket. The third one is environment. Okay, so we kind of mentioned radiation and whatnot, but it's no longer a matter if you have toxicity, it's how bad is it and how does it interplay with your drops in the bucket and your personal threshold, because we are living on a filthy planet and it takes a lot more work to overcome those exposures. You do the best you can. None of us can live in a pristine environment. It's not possible today. And then we look at the microbiome. Literally, oh my gosh, I'm a naturopathic doctor and we obsess about poop, and we've obsessed about the microbiome my entire career, but so did people like Hippocrates and the Ayurvedic physicians before that have been talking about this. And literally we were poo-pooed, and I mean that pun intentionally, about this concept until someone finally started to realize, oh, wait a minute, we can make money here. And now let's talk about how important the microbiome is. And that's really new, even just in the last, what would you say, 5-6 years, Mary? Yeah. Now everyone's talking about the microbiome. Mm-hmm. Now that it's actionable and profitable, now we're talking about it as if it's just suddenly shown up in our existence. So the microbiome, the immune system, which is intimately connected to our microbiome and our metabolic health, all those pieces. But the immune system, if you've lived under a rock for the last 2 years, you might not know about the immune system, but we are all clearly dealing with some disrupted immune systems by the very nature of what's happened on the pandemic level, relational to things like our metabolic health and our microbiome, by the way. And then we look at inflammation. We're known as the inflammation nation. People used to die of infections. Today we die of inflammation. Actually, today we die of both because we're so beaten up in our terrain. And then we look at our angiogenesis, our cardiovascular health, our circulatory rhythm, our oxygenation. That's kind of one drop in the bucket. They're very interconnected. Hormonal balance. We pretty much swim in a swimming pool of exogenous hormones. And then most of us have inborn epigenetics that make us process our hormones incorrectly, especially in the face of things like high insulin. And then we look at stress. If you live on the planet, you have stress, and our circadian rhythms. So all of the blue light exposures, all the light, toxicity, pollution that's out there, all of the EMS, all those things that are affecting our circadian rhythm. And then finally, probably the most important bucket drop, which we've already alluded to, the mental emotional. So those are the 10 things that change the expression of the cytoplasm, that extracellular matrix, that change the sort of efficiency and effectiveness of our mitochondria, and are in charge of what are maintaining the integrity of our genome and keeping us resilient and able to deal with whatever comes our way. And now less than 6.8% of us, 6.8% of us, at least in the Western world, are capable of doing that. And that's where my passion and Mary's passion and probably a lot of your passion comes in, is like, we're effed, like we're in trouble. And unless people really grab the reins super hard and take it on themselves to do it, no one can do this for you. There's not a pill, there's not a diet, there's nothing. It's got to be all the things for you to be effectively able to change your metabolic health. It's not just about what you eat, because it's also about what you think, and it's also about the hormonal balance and the stress response balance and how all of those drops in the bucket interact. So I go crazy when I hear people getting really dogmatic about a diet, or really dogmatic about a lifestyle approach, or really dogmatic. But I think it's like, you have to do all. If you're eating a perfectly high fat, low carb, ketogenic diet, but you're still in front of your screen at 3 a.m., you're screwing everything up. Your insulin is still a hot mess, right? If you are a woman who's like, the biohacker community, you're out there over exercising and taking all your bioidentical hormones, you're more at risk for cancers than most of the average Joe. Like, these are the things that people don't like to hear, but I'm not really about telling people what they want to hear. I'm like, let the data speak for itself. You don't want to become a patient of mine, or one of my colleagues. Like, we see the writing on the wall. We're just living in this toxic soup. And so it's a long answer to what has affected our terrain and this process, and yet we still like keep holding on to like, oh, it's just this germ, this virus that's the problem, or oh, it's just this cancer cell or this genetic mutation that's the problem. That is insane, because it isn't the problem. It doesn't arise unless everything else around it that it lands in is the problem. The soil seed hypothesis playing itself out pretty beautifully.
Yeah. Wow. That was a great explanation. I just love hearing all of that. And I especially love that you say that nobody's going to do this for you. Like, there is no shortcut. There's no easy way out. There's no pill. And, people will say, well, isn't your diet awfully limiting? It's very limited. Like, you don't eat very many things. And it's like, you know what? I think what's limiting is having no energy and having joint pain and being, having headaches and, children that can't function. And that to me is limiting.
Yes.
So these are things we get to pick and choose. What's more limiting? You actually eating a boring diet that might be, seem not very interesting and exciting, or you feel great. And so to me, it's just a no-brainer. It's like, it's okay. I've seen the things that happen when people insist on working too long, working too late, working when they're too old, and they should have retired 10 years ago, but they have to somehow, for whatever reason they've made up, need to keep working for unknown reasons that aren't about money. And then hope they still have some health left when they're able to retire. And I can't tell you how many people have come to me and quit their jobs because that's like the first thing I'll say. It's like, what are you doing? Like, this is no way to live. You're
working hard to die, not hard to live.
Yeah. And, so it's like, I tell them straight up truth. Like, this is not easy and you got to make some hard changes or you're going down the drain. That's pretty much the truth for a lot of people. And, we're just caught in I want to say a treadmill, like in a little hamster cage, it's so hard to get off, and everything out there, all the messaging is going against what you and I are talking about right now. And but a very few number of doctors, I mean, a lot more, thank God. Yes. But still, we need so much more to evolve. And, before that's going to happen, that may be 50 years from now. That we don't have time. A lot of people don't have that kind of time to wait until this, comes into the practice of medicine. It's just, we just don't have that much time. So
it should be standard of care. It should not be, people should not have to make a choice between the standard of care that's offered today and what we're talking about. It should just be the standard of care. It should just be integrated in that you get all of this information to make better choices for yourself and for your loved ones. And you start to I tell people, you have to become an advocate, you have to become an activist, you have to become our participant, you have to be in the driver's seat, and that people like Mary and myself and our colleagues are maybe the GPS to that, but you have to become an active participant in this. There's no other way around it. Yeah.
And also, you have to, become your own best healer. Like, we have to learn how to heal our own bodies. And that's what I would call true informed consent, which is totally missing in our medical model of care. And it's so infuriating to see that you can actually have a sliver of information delivered and think that that's all there is. Yeah. And that's really the crime that I have such a hard time with is, we're telling you a fraction of what your options are, but yet the patient believes and thinks that that's the only options that exist. Yeah. And so thank God for you and other people like myself that are putting this work out there. And it's just so important. So I don't know if you have a particular something on your mind that you want to share, or if you have a direction you want to go in, because we have a little bit more time and I'd love to hear more from you, and I'll stop talking because I'll ask you a question if you don't have something burning to talk about. But
one of the questions you posed to me that I kind of was kicking around last night and this morning was, what are 3 things you've learned during your personal journey that you think everyone should know? Something you thought, and I thought, it's funny because I think people assume that I knew everything that I know today the moment I got my diagnosis. Literally, I probably should have died so many damn times in that first decade of just really bad trial and error experiences, and just somehow managed to survive it. And one of those first things was, yes, I think the fasting was very helpful, incredibly helpful. But then I jumped right into the, I'll just be really blunt. I jumped right onto what at the time in 1991 was available about how to eat for a cancer diagnosis was the Gerson diet. Mm-hmm. And so I jumped right into a very, very because I didn't have the money to buy organic. So I was juicing like crazy. I had a friend who donated a juicer to me, and I was juicing tons and tons of non-organic greens. I did not know the concept. Nobody talked about oxalates or knew about oxalates then. Shut down my kidneys. I was like eating so like massive pounds and pounds and pounds of vegetables, and screwing up my thyroid because I was living on massive amounts of soy because I was being a vegan, and I completely blew out my thyroid. I completely became massively malnourished in B12. I would have massive tongue sores, lip sores. I had tingling sensations. I had a lot of weird neuropathy things. I'll just be really revealing that I did not poop because I had no magnesium. I had white spots on all my fingernails from zinc deficiency. I couldn't smell or taste well because of zinc deficiency. I had no protein. I was super protein malnourished. That was one of the toughest things. I could not build muscle to save my life. There was all these things that were happening and massive like skin issues, heel cracks, dry skin, unbelievable. My hair was falling out in clumps, and I was alive because I didn't, the cancer didn't take me, but I was putting myself from one frying pan into another. It wasn't until my second year of medical school when I also had started a Chinese medicine doctorate program as well. And my professor, Dr. Dang, said to me, who did my tongue and pulse, and he's like, "You have a glassy tongue. Your pulse is here." He goes, "This is in Chinese medicine. This is a sign of imminent death." And he didn't even know because I didn't tell anybody. I only had one professor at the college, and was my doctor who knew my medical history. He's like, "Something is very wrong here." And he's like, "You are not nourished. You have to eat some animal protein." And I was so against it. Oops, we'll have a truck drive by right now. But I was so against that, but I decided I would start with an egg. And so I spent, I don't know, probably the next year dabbling with eggs, and then created an egg allergy. And then I was pushed to try a little bit more. So salmon I moved into, and then it was like lights went on. I mean, I worked this through my body. So 1991 was my diagnosis. It wasn't until, even though I was applying fasting very regularly to my diet, that's probably what was keeping me going. I fasted a lot, and kept doing that. That was probably helping. But I also had so many autoimmune conditions that all of the grains and all of the legumes and a lot of the different vegetables that I was eating at the time, I was cross-lectin pollinating everything. I set off all of my autoimmune conditions. I was basically unable to walk. My ankles were so destroyed with rheumatoid arthritis. My Hashimoto's was such a mess. I was about 45 pounds heavier than I am today, working out an hour and a half to 2 hours, 5 days a week, and eating less than 1,200 calories a day. It was like the more I worked out and the less I ate, the fatter I got. These are the things that I learned. That was my long-term journey. And it wasn't until 2009 when I started to really, and this is years into my practice, like 8-9 years into my practice, I was putting patients on low carb diets. I was putting, patients on ketogenic diets because I thought that's what they needed, but I didn't think I needed it because I wasn't cancering at that time. I wasn't applying it. I was still a pretty hardcore vegetarian. I'd moved from vegan to vegetarianism. It wasn't until 2009 when I decided I'm going to try and take all the grains out of my diet and see what happens. And if you take out the grains, then you don't really get your full protein sources from the beans. So I had to take those out. And then I took out soy, actually took out soy before that. And I realized I had to put something else in. And so that's when I realized a diet, even though I had never liked meat the whole bit, I had to put in a little bit of poultry, more fish, more eggs. Weird thing, for 15 years, I couldn't do dairy. After I took grains and legumes out of my diet, I could do dairy again. For the first time. I tell you today, I would eat a piece of cheese over a piece of bread any day. Like that is like, for me, like that is such my, the huge benefit of this. my body changed so fast. My health changed so fast. So I literally felt like I spent nearly 20 years regaining my health. I finally had survived, but I was by no means thriving. And it wasn't until I made that change that things started happening. So I just want your listeners to know that I was a living laboratory. I made a lot of mistakes along the way. I learned what worked for me and didn't work for me. It was with my epigenetics I started to learn I was never meant to be, even though I'm an A blood type, that if you followed that, I was like, I should be a vegetarian. I can't be. Like, I have to have some protein. My ferritin levels were always in the single digits. There was so much leaky gut going on. I could not keep myself nourished. These are the things I had to learn over time. It's like, stop getting in my own way with my dogma and start following my data. And that's when I became really known for that, is really like test, assess, address, don't guess. So that was the game changer in my practice and in myself as well. It's like, stop believing what someone else is telling you or what you think is the right thing for you. Let your body tell you the story. And so the blood testing, the epigenetics testing, the functional medicine testing, those were the things that also took me to the next level of my health. And I'm here to tell you, I just got my September labs back. I do my labs now annually for monitoring. These are the healthiest they've ever been in my entire life. And I've been collecting these labs religiously for 30 years. And they're better now in my 50s than they ever were in my 40s, my 30s, my 20s. I keep learning something every day, every week, every month, every year. And so I want your listeners to hear that. It's like, it doesn't happen overnight, and you will make mistakes, and you will have things that it's like, it worked for a while, but it isn't now. So let's keep digging. Let's turn over the stone and see why.
Absolutely. Wow. That's amazing. So yeah, I've been through my own trial and errors as well. I was vegan once. I was vegetarian. I would work for a company, formulating green smoothie powders for other companies. And, I was really addicted to my green smoothies and my, my chocolate and my black tea. I mean, I can't tell you how many years I did that. And luckily my kidneys still work, but, I've learned a lot in the meantime, and, I have cut out a lot of things just like you just mentioned. And it feels like we have a very similar diet. But I guess what I'd love to know is, what do you eat, and what's working for you now, and what do you find that's working for the majority of patients that you're seeing?
Oh, I love that. And it's funny because you mentioned it kind of being a bland diet. My husband and I are both extreme foodies, and he eats the same way. He eats this way because of bipolar disorder. And it is completely, in fact, Dr. Christopher Palmer just put out his book this week on basically metabolic psychiatry and the whole realm of this.
I'm reading it right now. I love it.
I'm just
loving it. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. I was going to mention that too. So I'm glad you did.
I'm so glad. And it's like, so he did it, like he went to eat with me to in solidarity. And then it changed his life, which then of course changed our relationship as well, because, it's not fun living with somebody dealing with chronic illness and anything, mental or physical. I was chronically physically ill, and he was chronically mentally ill. And both of us doing this, we're like superheroes now. Like, we'd laugh about how he'll be 54 this coming year, and I'll be 52 in 2023. It's like, how is it possible that we are in the best shape of our lives in so many ways? But those changes we started to make, how we eat today, we're both huge foodies. We both love to cook. We both live in an area, we were just talking about this before, we live in Mexico, where there are 5 farmers markets a week in our area. We know all of our farmers. We know all of our ranchers. We know where all of our food comes from. We know the sources of it. We know how clean it is. We're in an area that doesn't use glyphosate, doesn't use pesticides. So we're very fortunate for that. So we intermittent fast pretty regularly. I don't really eat breakfast. It's a treat. It's like if I'm on vacation or something, it might be like a brunch. We're really a 2-day eater because we both have metabolic issues. So I can eat like a pint of raspberries and nothing happens to meet my blood sugar, but my husband eats too, and his blood sugar goes off. He's got a family thread of massive diabetes in his world, so he has to work a lot harder. I can get away with a lot more carbs. I can probably get upwards of 70 grams a day without it messing with me. And he has to probably keep his closer to 30 to 40 grams a day. But so we've kind of learned our own place here. But really, tonight, for instance, we're making an asparagus soup. in a coconut milk base, but we'll actually, it'll have quite a lot of olive oil drizzled into it as well. A lot of black pepper. We actually use we use a ton of veggies. So we always make our soups very veggie dense. So there'll be a cauliflower pureed into that mix to make it creamier. We'll also be adding in some poblano chilies, and then we'll have an arugula salad with that, with some slivered, we get great macadamia nuts down here. So we'll kind of chop up the mac nuts with more olive oil and avocado. Like that's probably going to be dinner time. And that's our simple dinner. That's like a super fast, because we both work late tonight. That's kind of a go-to. And then we do a ton, like whenever if we do a protein, we always do at least 3 veggies with it. And then we are big into sauces and big into pestos and all kinds of those things, which also can nutrient dense, because we aim for 9 to 15 servings of veggies a day.
Okay.
And then have we're like fat bomb people. So we take in a ton of fat. I don't even have to eat a high fat, low carb diet anymore. Just sort of staying low carb with like my normal fat amount works well for my chemistry. My husband does better if he does more fat and less protein. High protein actually spikes up his insulin levels. He could be a carnivore. He would love to be a carnivore, but it makes him diabetic. And so he has to do it. So we learn these tricks for ourselves. We don't do smoothies. We don't snack. If we have treats, now there are 2 in Puerto Vallarta area. There are 2 keto bakeries, and they use monk fruit, which I do really well with. I don't do well with the sugar alcohols. And so that's our big treat. They make some really good, treats that we do on occasion, but it's more like when we have friends visiting, we kind of make it treats for them. We found a great place here that makes homemade tortillas with, pork rinds, psyllium husk, it's like maybe egg. I can't remember. It's like 3 basic ingredients, but it's 100% keto. It does not throw our blood sugars off at all. And when we take them to our restaurants, we always bring an extra packet for them because they love them so much. They taste so good and they hold up so well. So we get to still be like street taco people. We have to be careful because corn oils and everything down here. Yeah. So we only go to places where we know that they won't use corn oil. They'll either grill stuff for us, or we actually will bring our own coconut oil, or they'll use coconut oil or avocado oil in the restaurants we like to go to. So those are just some examples, but like our friends and family, they love to come visit us because they say they eat better with us than ever. So it doesn't have to be a bland or boring diet. And we have over 180 recipes we've collected that we're hoping to put together as a cookbook specific for cancer patients, but no one ever feels like they're without in our world. And we can keto-fy just about anything.
Yeah.
So
That's great. I love that. And anybody can keto-fy anything. If you Google keto anything, you'll find a keto recipe for it. So you don't have to deprive yourself. You don't have to feel like you're missing out and can't enjoy the party. Like there's so many enjoyable things that we can make and still be low carb. So I appreciate that. And I can't wait to read your cookbook. That would be awesome.
It'll help all of us. It's kind of fun. I mean, we've even mastered the ketofied, margarita down here.
Oh yeah.
So, those are pretty easy because, tequila is actually very low carb and fresh squeezed lime. And, I like actually, if I'm in the US, I use the, Bragg's organic limeade that's got a little bit of stevia as my sweet and sour. But down here, we just do the lime. It's like there's just like a weird natural sweetness to the tequila down here. I don't even understand what that's all about, but it's really simple. So those are the types of things that your palate starts to change over time and you just enjoy it. And it's like for us, because food is so much about love and ritual and connection. Yeah. We do like to make it beautiful and flavorful, and we do like to share it with others. And so I always want people to feel like when we're supporting patients going through this process, it's like we always kind of give them a few running start ideas or recipes or little hacks, in the kitchen to make this enjoyable. But even all of us could benefit from low carb. Most of us probably need to be keto cycling or at least intermittent fasting to get into ketosis. Because remember, a ketogenic diet is one way to achieve ketosis, which is a natural physiologic response. So I'm always reminding people, you can get there through fasting. You can get there through vegan fasting. You can get there through carnivore and fasting. You can get there through just low carb. You can get there through exogenous ketones. There's multiple roads to Rome. Ultimately, people have to be a living laboratory to see what works best for them. My preference would be to have brunch and early, like maybe like eat between sort of 11 and 4. But my husband's love language is cooking and he likes to make a big dinner, right? So those are the crazy things. Like I shift that to meet our relationship needs, but you can play with what works for you. Maybe some people rather skip breakfast. Some people rather skip dinner if they're playing with the intermittent fasting world. But there's so many ways. Like today, it's so exciting to me to have these conversations because Mary will tell you, she's been at this since 1994. Even when I started like in the gluten-free world back in the mid to late 2009, 2010, oh my gosh, everything gluten-free tasted like cardboard. And today it's like everything is wonderful that's gluten-free. It's just incredible the options that are out there. The same thing is happening in the ketogenic world, that it kind of went from, this will do, to things like, this is amazing. Like this is better than the real deal. So it's a good time to be jumping on these bandwagons and using your dollars and your experiences to change the narrative, because that's way more impactful than any other research and anything I could tell patients or patients tell doctors. We can change things with our dollars as well.
Absolutely. I mean, like you said, there's keto bakeries now, there's keto everything now. So it's just everywhere. And it's so awesome. I love it. I used to just be the weirdo, back then it was like, oh, totally. She's going to tell you to stop eating sugar. That's all she's ever told anybody.
I know.
Okay. Well, I'm still saying that, but at least we have some options.
Yeah. That's the one thing I've been in the field of integrative oncology for 31 years. I've watched a lot of trends come and go and return again and again and again, both in the standard of care as well as the integrative world. And the one thing that's remained consistent is the power of intermittent fasting and therapeutic ketosis. Like those things have not changed at all. Like that is still, if people dirty keto it or go to like Atkins dirty keto, that's never good for anybody. Definitely not the cancer population. But if they're doing clean keto and good intermittent fasting, that's this like one consistent thread that seems to be supportive in all the things.
Okay, that's really great to hear that. I love it. And so, do you wear, or do you recommend that your patients wear a CGM, continuous glucose monitors?
Well, so in the cancer world, we want people to start with, testing their urine until they see moderate levels, then they graduate to blood. And once they get to blood on their blood ketone levels, then we make sure they get to being metabolically flexible. We make sure that they are in fact fat burning, and there's different ways we do that. And once they've achieved that, then I want them to bring in things like the CGM or the BioSense or whatever brand of the breath, so they can start to see the nuances of like, what did a stressful day at work do for you?
Yeah.
What did going to bed too early or too late do for you? What did overworking out or underworking out do for you? So it's once you get into that zone, that's when I like to bring in those for when you're wanting to just see how life is treating you, see how things are expressing from you. So it's a really powerful tool. I think when people are onboarding in the oncology world, giving them a CGM or a breath test can actually really overwhelm them. It can even give them like false sense, because cancer metabolism is different from the healthy metabolism. You can actually look like you're having ketones when it's actually just the lactic, like the acetate from the tumor itself. And so you need to get into therapeutic ketosis in the blood to make sure you're reading the right type of ketones, or the right type of things that can be misunderstood in blood, or in the breath or the CGM. So this is quite helpful for folks to use those to sort of more titrate and manipulate their system and really understand what makes you tick.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And so, okay, well, I just am so delighted to hear all this. This has just been amazing, Nasha. I am so excited to have been able to have this conversation with you. And I know that we're just a little bit over time. And so thank you so much. I honor your time, and I want to let you get back to your busy life. And I really look forward to reconnecting in the future in Mexico, maybe at one of my retreats. And I'd love to see you there. And yeah, there's amazing things happening in Mexico. And not to mention there's sunshine there. So
yes, my vitamin D is so happy here. So yes, thank you for that. Yes. And you're right. Mexico is actually doing a lot more in the metabolic field than I think we're doing in the US. Yeah. I'm noticing that it's way more talked about here and dealt with here. And for important reasons. I mean, it's their state of diabetes is overtaking ours, in the US. So it's great that someone's paying attention and trying to do something about it. Yeah,
absolutely. All right, Nasha. Well, thank you again so much, and have a wonderful holiday, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, Mary.
I realize that what you've heard here is a radical departure from today's politically correct nutritional guidance. If it were politically correct, it would be endorsed by the media. And if it were endorsed by the media, it would be endorsed by Big Pharma. Let's face it, Big Pharma makes money when you and I stay sick. But the truth is, you can take control of your health if you have a plan, a system in place, and a support network. After helping people get keto adapted for over 25 years, I found that everyone who succeeds does 3 things. I walk you through exactly what these are and what to do specifically to get into ketosis in just 5 days. You can join my next 5-day keto challenge right now by going to ketogenicdietcoach.com. I look forward to seeing you on the inside of the challenge and helping you have wild success with your keto diet.